It's a pleasure to be with you. I'm always happy to come back to Stanford, come back to APARC, to be with colleagues and friends. So really appreciate the opportunity. And some former students I see as well. So, so it's great to see you all. So let me tell you a little bit about this. This is largely based on work that I've done in my capacity at CSIS. As Georg said, I'm Senior Vice President for Asia, but I also hold the Korea Chair. And one of the things we did, the Korea Chair started about 14 years ago, my goodness. And one of the things that we focused on in the Korea Chair was trying to collect more data about North Korea. North Korea is famously opaque. Very little information, but we tried to collect as much data as we could in terms of their behavior, and then to use that to try to understand what North Korea is doing, what they may do. Too often, the study of North Korea is based on intuition, hunches, based on years of watching North Korea, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with experienced hunches. But what we always felt was that the study of North Korea was based too much on hunches and intuition and not enough on data. So, what I'll show you today is it's not very intricate and detailed regression analysis. It's just pulling together some data about North Korea to see patterns, correlations in their behavior to try to better understand what we should expect to see in 2024, because there's been a lot of speculation lately about what North Korea might be doing in the coming year or so. So, as you'll see, it's a combination of we have a data set on sort of North Korean provocations. We have a bunch of different data sets. It's also based on satellite imagery. Like something else that we're able to do at CSIS is we have these arrangements with commercial satellite imagery companies. And so we're able to take a lot of pictures of North Korea, particularly in this case, North Korea and Russia, to look at sort of the arms trade that's taking place there. So I'll talk about a number of these things in the course of my talk, and then of course I'm happy to take any questions that you might have about it. Okay, so in terms of the bottom line up front. This is something you learn in Washington, D.C., because you may not get to the end of your presentation before someone interrupts you. So the bottom line up front is that we certainly expect to see much more behavior, much more provocative behavior by North Korea in 2024, with very little opportunity for dialogue. It's not impossible. Dialogue is not impossible, but right now, it looks unlikely given the current situation. So the bottom line up front is 2024 is not going to be a good year. It's going to be a bit of a roller coaster, and the opportunities for dialogue are not great right now. So why do we say this? So if we look at the current situation, in slide 1 here, we see that over the past 4 administrations, there has been a steady rise in the annual average number of North Korean provocations. So during George W. Bush, their average was about 3.5 provocations a year. This was the administration that I worked in. I can tell you it felt like a lot more than only 3.5 a year. It felt like it was happening like every other week. But if you average it out over 8 years, it was 3.5, right? 3.5 provocations. During the Obama administration, it went up to almost 11 per year during the 8 years of Obama. During Trump, it was about the same. That was surprising to me because during the Trump administration, you remember there was the first year, we'll look in a second, the first year there were a lot of provocations, but then they kind of dropped off, and certainly Trump made it sound like everything had been solved. But if we actually look at sort of statistically the number of provocations, there actually isn't much of a difference between Trump and Obama. That probably won't make Donald Trump very happy, because of his love letter relationship with Kim Jong-un, but that's basically the same. And then, of course, we see during Biden a dramatic increase, right? Annual average of 33, and we'll define what we mean by provocations in a second, but average annual of 33 provocations per year. And I believe this is updated for the most recent. I believe this is updated for the most recent ones as well. So if we look at this in terms of North Korean provocations under Biden and Trump, see, this is what happens when you ask people to update things the morning of the conference. This is not correct. So in 2017, we actually saw it's up around here, 20 to 25 provocations that took place in 2017. This was the year of so-called fire and fury, when they were calling each other names. We were doing three carrier exercises around the Korean Peninsula. As we learned later from Bob Woodward's memoirs, Bob Woodward's book, that Trump actually wanted to tweet out that U.S. dependents should leave Korea, right? Which would have, if he had, and he was eventually distracted away from doing that, but if he had tweeted that out, that could have created a real crisis in Korea. If Koreans and Americans knew that the President of the United States was saying dependents should leave, right, that would have created, and it would have created a reaction from the North Korean side as well, right? So 2017, we saw a huge number of provocations. Yeah, this is not right. In 2018, 2018 is omitted here for some reason, but there were actually none. We had no provocations in 2018. I think the only year in the entire data set where there's no provocation, because that was when the summitry started, right? That was when you had the Singapore summit, all the love letters, all of the high envoy Pompeo going to North Korea, all of this taking place. So 2017, we had 25 provocations. 2018, we had nothing, right? And then 2019, 2020, we see them restart. When the diplomacy all fails, when the summit diplomacy all fails, it all stops. If we look at the Biden administration, when it started in 2021, North Korea was fairly quiet. Didn't do a whole lot of belligerent behavior, but almost like clockwork, in January of 2022, we see an explosion, right? It's almost as if they gave the Biden administration 1 year to sort of see what their policy was going to be, and then when they saw it was going to be basically the same as Obama's, right, so-called strategic patience, they just did a whole bunch of these. And then they continue in 2024. They're continuing at a pretty rapid pace in 2024. Red is missile provocations, and gray is other sorts of provocations. So, like I said, we see this secular increase in North Korean belligerent behavior over the administrations, and the question is why, right? So, in terms of why, why do we see this? So, I think there are three answers or three theories that could be tested on this. The first is that the increase has to do largely with science and development. Like I said, I refer to them by shorthand as provocations, but that's probably not the right term to use anymore to describe this behavior. Some of it may be provocations, but some of it is actually science-based testing, right? They are trying to improve and perfect different types of missiles, whether you're talking about cruise missiles, short-range ballistic missiles, medium-range ballistic missiles, sea-launched ballistic missiles, long-range ballistic missiles. They're trying to perfect these capabilities, right? And so in doing that, they're trying to see whether they can launch with solid fuel propellant, not just liquid fuel propellant, mobile launch capabilities, not just static launch capabilities. Eventually try to deploy countermeasures, particularly with the long-range ballistic missiles, trying to perfect hypersonic capabilities, multiple warheads on a single delivery vehicle, all of these sorts of things. So why do we see this increase? Part of it just has to do with development and science. They're trying to get better at what they're doing. And that takes a lot of practice. That takes a lot of work. And the North Korean leader has already made very clear that he wants to put at least 2 more satellites into orbit, military satellites into orbit. So that means at least 2 more long-range rocket launches, right? So part of it is just about science and development. The other part of it also has to do with exercising, right? Operational exercising. So when they fire the same missile over and over and over again, that is not for development and perfecting, that is operational exercising. When they do short-range ballistic missile test, followed by a long-range ballistic missile test, followed by a bomber run, right, that is exercising. They are doing operational exercising. So just like the US and South Korea, the US, the South Korea, and Japan are doing exercising, North Korea is doing exercising as well. And they're doing more exercising now with these missile capabilities, ballistic missile capabilities, in conjunction with conventional capabilities. Okay. So that's another reason. It has to do with exercising. And then the third reason that I think we're seeing an increase in these in this sort of activity has to do with diplomacy, or the lack of diplomacy. Right. So other data that we've collected, going all the way back to so we have a data set of all of the diplomatic negotiations that have taken place between the United States and North Korea. And we have a data set, of course, of all the provocations. And so if we compare those two, I mean, we didn't do any sort of like regression, but when you compare those two, there's clearly a pattern there, right? There's clearly a pattern in the sense that when the United States and North Korea are sitting at the table talking to each other, whether it's in bilateral form or in multilateral form, whether it's in bilateral sort of talks or multilateral 6-party talks, 4-party talks, whatever it may be, when there are sustained periods of diplomacy that are ongoing, North Korea does far less testing, right? Far less of this so-called provocative behavior, however you want to define it, right? As operational exercising, science and development, or provocative testing. And as I've said before, like we haven't seen any diplomacy with North Korea since 2018, really, right? 2018, 2019. So, and in 2021, they gave the Biden administration a chance, but when it looked like there was nothing forthcoming, they just started to engage in their usual pattern, of behavior, right? So why do we see this secular increase? Science, exercising, and lack of diplomacy. Okay. So what does that mean for 2024? As I said at the outset, I'm afraid to say that I think things are going to get worse. Right? We expect to see a heightened tempo of whatever you want to call it, testing, demonstrations, exercising in 2024. Because in addition to these trends that I've described, there are 2 other factors that are important. The first of these is, as if anybody's been paying attention, 2024 is an election year. Right? It's an election year in the United States. Right? We have presidential elections at the end of this year. And again, when we look at sort of the data of U.S. elections, major election years, so that's midterm elections or presidential elections, there's another pattern that's there, right? And that is that the tempo of activity by North Korea increases during U.S. election years, right? So if we look here, this is, if you sort of look at the annual average number of provocations under Kim Jong-un from 1996 to 2010, and you compare that to Kim Jong-il from 1996 to 2010, and you compare that with Kim Jong-un from 2012 to 2022, only in midterm election years and U.S. presidential election years, we see a clear difference in the average annual number of provocations, right? They've gone up much more under Kim Jong-un, right? Why they do this, we can all hazard guesses as to why. North Korea thinks they're the center of the universe anyway, so they think maybe they can influence the U.S. election. Maybe they want to put pressure on the incoming administration to pro-offer things like lifting of sanctions and things to get to make themselves a high priority for the next administration. You know, we can speculate as to the reasons why, but very clearly in U.S. election years under Kim Jong-un, there's a lot more activity. There's a lot more activity that's taking place. And then the other reason why, in addition to the other factors, why 2024 is probably not going to be a very good year is U.S. ROK and U.S. ROK Japan military exercising, right? So I didn't load this all up here, but some other data we pulled together has sort of looked at the correlation between North Korean activity and U.S. ROK military exercises. We actually have a paper that we're going to present in San Francisco at ISA in the spring, right? No, it is the spring. In whenever ISA is, March or April. In San Francisco, we actually have a paper that does do a sort of a sophisticated regression analysis. And what it finds is that what it finds is that if there is no diplomacy taking place between the United States and North Korea within a 6-week window before U.S. ROK military exercises start, if there's no diplomacy, North Korea reacts very vigorously, right? They come very hard with their activity. But if there is some diplomacy that's taking place between the two countries, and we have military exercises, then their reaction is actually quite muted, right? And even if they act, it has no effect on the overall state of diplomacy. So if there's diplomacy going on, we do military exercises. North Korea may have some sort of response to that, but it doesn't affect the diplomacy that takes place after the exercise, right? So the point of all this is to say right now, as I mentioned, we're not in any diplomacy with North Korea. We have major U.S. ROK military exercises coming up in the first quarter of this year. And then probably pursuant to Camp David, the trilateral meeting at Camp David, they will do the new named U.S. ROK Japan military exercises. You know, it's most likely that North Korea will respond quite vigorously to those. So, so as you all know in social science, this is what you call an overdetermined outcome. I mean, there are many reasons here why we should expect to see a lot more behavior by North Korea, bad behavior by North Korea in 2024. This is so moving. So that's sort of the data. Moving to the policy side of this. So I would say that this is not the fault, right? This is not the fault of the Biden administration. The Biden administration has informally they've said that they have tried to, and they probably say it publicly now. They've tried to contact North Korea over 20 times, 20 different initiatives. There's this now famous story of how the primary means the United States uses to contact North Korea is through something called the New York Channel, which is State Department, usually about the desk director level, that speaks to, talks or sends messages to Pyongyang through the Deputy Permanent Representative in New York at the UN. And it's even gotten to the point where the U.S. government official has gone and knocked on the door, the DPRK mission in New York. They don't answer the door. The U.S. official takes the envelope and slides it under the door. And This is not a joke. They slide it under the door, they walk away, and then like 3 seconds later, it gets kicked back out. They just kick it back out under the door. That's the level of disinterest that North Korea has right now in talking to the United States. A more serious and substantial evidence of this was the way the case of Travis King was resolved. So Travis King was a U.S. Army soldier who was being escorted out of South Korea for some bad behavior. He then left Incheon Airport, got on a DMZ tour, and then ran across the Joint Security Area during one of those tours, which now will make it impossible for any of you to go on a tour, unfortunately, for a while, because that's all been locked down now. But after a few months of I'm sure after a few months of quarantine, because the North Koreans are still quite fearful of COVID getting into the country, and interrogation, they were ready to send him back, right? And talking to Biden administration officials, this is not the first time this has happened. There have been many cases in the past of Americans that get detained in North Korea, and usually the United States ends up having to send a senior official or a former senior official to go and bring these people back. So these have included quite important people like former President Jimmy Carter, former President Bill Clinton, senior envoy Ambassador Joseph Yun, Governor Bill Richardson, right? A number of people have had to go and bring back these. And in the past, the United States government did so reluctantly. Like we didn't like to do it this way, but if we wanted the citizens back, we would do it this way. This time, although they didn't say it publicly, Travis King potentially presented an opportunity for the administration to have some sort of dialogue with North Korea about negotiating Travis King's return. And so something that was done reluctantly in the past was now possibly an opportunity, right? Because it was no longer the envelopes being kicked back underneath the door. It might be an opportunity for dialogue. When the North Koreans were ready to release Travis King, they had two conditions, right? The first was that he be released to a third country, right? And second, they didn't want to talk to the United States, right? They wanted to do it, and so it was done through Sweden. Sweden is the U.S. protecting power in North Korea, so when I was a U.S. official and I went to North Korea, we didn't have a control officer. We don't have an ambassador. We don't have anybody that meets us there. We have the ambassador from Sweden, right? He's the one that meets us at the airport through Sweden and through China, right? So that's the level of disinterest that North Korea showed in wanting to talk to the United States. So this is why I think 2024 is not going to be a good year. I mean, we have all of these trends and possible explanations as to why there should be an increase, and our traditional exit ramp, right? Our traditional exit ramp for an increase in provocations is not there, right? Which is diplomacy. Usually, that has been our traditional exit ramp for doing this. Does this mean we're headed for something very serious, even a war with North Korea in 2024? I don't really think so, for four reasons. And I know because there's been a lot of speculation about the possibility of North Korea having made a strategic decision to go to war. I think, as I said, in 2024, I think it's going to get a lot worse, but I don't think we're headed for a war for four reasons. First, I do not believe that North Korea is confident enough in their capabilities such that they believe that they can deter U.S. and South Korean retaliation. Right? Sure, they talk a lot about their capabilities and their confidence, but I think in their core calculation, I don't think that, as delusional as they may be, I do not think that they feel that they are so confident in their capabilities that they can deter U.S. retaliation. Second, the up-tempo in U.S. ROK and U.S. ROK Japan exercising ensures that Kim Jong-un does not make a miscalculation, right? It ensures that there will not be a miscalculation that somehow North Korea feels it is so confident in their capabilities that they can deter U.S. retaliation. Third, if North Korea were really ready to go to war, they would not be selling all of their ammunition to Russia. Right? Of course, they can make more ammunition, and one of the things that I am concerned about is that North Korea doesn't have a bottomless supply of ammunition. And so one of the things I worry about going down the road is co-production, right? That Russia will help North Korea produce more munitions. But at the same time, though, if North Korea were really ready to go to war, there are a lot of things that they should be doing that they're not doing, and there are a lot of things they shouldn't be doing that they are doing. And one of them is like they wouldn't be selling all of their ammunition to Russia. And then fourth, if North Korea were really ready to go to war, they would not be decoupling from South Korea. They would actually be trying to engage South Korea, right? North Korea is all about strategic deception. And as they did on the eve of the Korean War, right, and the eve of the June 1950 invasion, they would be talking about peace offensive, trying to engage South Korea. As you know, right now, they're doing the complete opposite, right? Decoupling from South Korea, discrediting the notion of unification, calling South Korea the enemy state. This is not deception, right? This is signaling, which is not the way the North Koreans traditionally operate, right? They would normally be, if they were really serious about war, they would be using deception. Okay, so that then takes me to, I want to talk a little about Russia DPRK, because this is, I think, this is like the really bad news right now. So just when you thought it could not get any worse, there's this new relationship between North Korea and Russia. This is actually historically unprecedented. And the reason I say it's historically unprecedented is, of course, the DPRK, the Soviet Union, Russia have always had a relationship going back to the Korean War, right, or even before the Korean War. Either during the Soviet occupation of Northern Korea, they've always had a relationship. But the relationship was largely one-sided in the sense that it was North Korea that was always asking Soviet Union, Russia for a security guarantee, for a nuclear umbrella, for fuel, right? During the Cold War, the Soviet Union subsidized fuel to North Korea, and I think it was like 25% of market price, so heavily subsidized fuel, and debt relief, right? So whenever the North Koreans and the Russians met, it was always the North Koreans asking for security guarantee. It was all like what they wanted from Russia: security guarantees, fuel, debt relief, right? Entirely one-sided relationship. That's not the relationship today, right? In fact, the relationship has been completely reversed, right? In the sense that it's the Russians that need something from North Korea, right? And that is basically ammunition for the war in Ukraine. The NATO Secretary General just recently said the war in Ukraine is a war of ammunition. It's a war of ammunition. And North Korea has become sort of the primary ammunition supplier to North Korea. According to the South Korean Ministry of Defense, 2.5 million rounds at least, right, of ammunition for North Korea. And I'll show you some imagery related to that. So that's bad news. The second part of the bad news is that what are the Russians giving in return for all of this ammunition, right? Now, of course, it's food and fuel, right? That is sort of what Russia has traditionally given to North Korea. But as you all know, or you saw in the papers, the North Korean leader recently went to Russia, right? Now, this is intuition, but I don't think it's that far off. And like my intuition is that the leader of North Korea is not going to travel all the way to Russia for food, right? He's not going to go all the way to Russia for, take that long train ride just for food, right? And so the concern is, what else are the Russians giving to North Korea in return for ammunition? The North Korean leader, like I said, recently announced that he wants to put 2 more military satellites into orbit this year in his New Year's or plenary New Year's address. Military satellite technology, right? That's one possibility. The North Korean leader recently was reported to have reviewed the plan for nuclear-powered submarines, right? The North Korean propaganda machine would not put that out there if not for a reason, right? And so second concern is provision of nuclear submarine technology. North Korea recently birthed a new Ramon-class submarine that it's very noisy, so it doesn't pose a problem militarily, but it was refitted with, I think it was 8 or 10 or 12 missile tubes, launch tubes, right, for sea-launched missiles. And the North Korean leader has said, he's reviewed the nuclear submarine project, is very happy with it, so on and so forth. So these are real concerns, that it could not just be food and fuel, but it could be sort of high-end, cutting-edge military technology that could be very problematic. Now, historically, the Soviet Union has been very stingy with providing this sort of military technology to North Korea. The North Koreans have asked for ballistic missile designs in the past from the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union has said no. So what North Korea did was that they acquired these missiles through third countries. They reverse engineered those missiles, and then they added a North Korean thing, and then they called it a North Korean missile, right? So yes, the Soviets historically have been stingy with giving this sort of technology to North Korea. But we're in a completely different situation now, right? I mean, Putin is fighting for his life in Ukraine. If he loses the war in Ukraine, he's gone. He's finished, right? He's finished. So he's fighting for his life in Ukraine, and he needs North Korean munitions to outlast the West, right? Which may make him much more desperate, right? His cost calculation may completely change. And he's slated to go to Pyongyang. He's slated to make a return visit to North Korea sometime soon. Third piece of bad news is that from Putin's perspective, this could very much be sort of like a triple win strategy for him, in the sense that he gets his ammunition, but he also is able to complicate the U.S. strategic picture outside of Europe, right? The fact that if he provides nuclear submarine technology, military satellite technology to North Korea, he's not only affecting U.S. calculations in Europe, he's now affecting U.S. calculations in Asia, right? And then third, of course, is, as I mentioned before, co-production, right? As you read in the papers, a lot of the stuff that North Korea is sending to Russia is not great, right? It's like some of it's like circa 1950s ammunition. But this also, as they deplete those stocks and Russia needs more, this also opens opportunities for co-production in North Korea with the Russians. Right? And then the fourth bit of bad news is the war in Ukraine. I mean, Kim Jong-un was probably opening a bottle of champagne when Russia's position in the war in Ukraine was getting worse, right? Because if you think about it, the last time we saw Kim Jong-un was when Donald Trump walked out of the summit in Hanoi, Vietnam, right? In 2019, right? In February 2019, when he walked out of the summit. I was covering the summit for NBC News. I could not go to Hanoi because I was teaching that semester, so I could not go to Hanoi. So I did it from 30 Rockefeller Plaza. And because of the time difference, we were there. We did sort of when they did the entry and the handshake. And they said, you can go to the hotel now because they're going to be in summit meetings for the next 3 hours according to schedule. And then they'll come out for lunch and you can come back. And so we said, okay, it was me, Wendy Sherman, and Sumi Terry. And so we all went back to the hotel. As soon as we got into the hotel room, we get a phone call and they say, you have to come back to the studio right now. We're like, why? They just started the meeting. They go, you have to come back right now. And they said, we said, is the car ready? They go, no, just run back, right? Just run back. And it was, of course, because Donald Trump cut the summit off and walked out. Hugely embarrassing for Kim Jong-un. There could not have been anything more embarrassing for Kim Jong-un, right? They really went out, all the myth making around him, and then they put him on this big stage, second summit with the U.S. president, and Trump walks out, and Kim has to take the long train ride back, right, from Vietnam to Pyongyang. That was the last time we saw him, and then after that, COVID, right? 3-year pandemic lockdown for North Korea, 3 years, right? So for Kim Jong-un, there was no way to recover from this except with something big, right? And no offense to anybody, another summit meeting with the Singaporean Prime Minister would not do it, right? A summit with the Indonesian president, that's not going to do it. It had to be something big, given everything that he had suffered as a result of the pandemic and as a result of the failure of the summit diplomacy with Donald Trump. And that was Putin, right? Hugely important for Putin. Also puts Kim in a very good position vis-a-vis China, right? Because the Chinese, Xi Jinping, as some of you may remember, would not meet with Kim Jong-un until Donald Trump said he was going to do a summit meeting with Kim Jong-un. Then Xi Jinping met with Kim Jong-un 5 times. Right? Then after the failure in Hanoi, never met with him again. Has not met with him again. Right? So I expect to see Xi Jinping and Kim Jong-un meeting again. So let me. So just to sum up, again, 2024 is not going to be a good year. It'll be worse than we've seen thus far. Be bad, but it doesn't mean that we're going to war. I think there may be some coercion, particularly against South Korea, which we could talk about. The chances for diplomacy right now are low. That is traditionally our exit ramp. And DPRK Russia relations are only going to grow. Oh, I want to show you some imagery. Are only going to grow more. So this is just to sort of finish quickly. So what North Korea is doing is they're moving stuff from Najin to Dane in Russia, and then it's being transported to these 3 munition storage facilities in Russia near the Ukrainian front. This is Tikhoretsk, and I want to show you this picture because this is already a munition storage facility. This is what it looked like in August of 2023. Right, that's what it looked like in August of 2023, and this is what it looks like now. Right, this is in February. This was like last week, and so you can see all of the new facilities that have been built. Right, munition storage area, numerous occupied revetted storage areas throughout. There's heavy rail traffic, but this is all storing North Korean munitions. Right, the other site is Mozdok. This, again, is an established munitions storage facility in Russia. This image is from July 2024. What we see is from October 2023. So in Tikhoretsk here, we see all of this building taking place. And then from October to 2023 to January 2024, there's a lot of activity. Right? There's a lot of activity that's taking place. Mozdok, this one is the most interesting. Can somebody pronounce that? No Russian expert. Can somebody pronounce that? All right, okay. So this was actually a helicopter facility. It's not a very good image, but this was a helicopter facility, right? in September of 2023, and this is what it looks like now. So they basically converted this helicopter facility into another storage facility, approximately 320 newly constructed storage revetments, many of which are occupied, right? So this is all happening because of North Korea, right? This is all happening because of North Korean munitions. So it does raise the question of U.S. policy traditionally has been we want to engage with North Korea in dialogue about denuclearization. Denuclearization is not going to happen anytime soon, but this is now, I think, the policy priority, right, for the United States when it comes to North Korea. And the question is, what can you do, right? What can you do to try to stop, curtail, disincentivize this sort of activity? It's not easy, right? It's not easy. So with that, let me just thanks for your attention. I'd love to take some questions.
So we have about 30 minutes for Q&A. So please identify yourself and then make question, okay, not your lecture. And then try to be brief so that we have more people to speak. Okay. Yeah, Kyo and then.
Kyo Tutsui, ABOC. Thank you for the terrific presentation. A couple quick questions. First, about the provocation data. Fascinating. And there seems to be an underlying assumption that provocations are all, North Korean provocations are all vis-a-vis the United States, and which might be a solid assumption. But there are other players like South Korea, Japan. And I don't know if you can differentiate, some provocations are targeted more toward Japan and others are toward the US. I don't really know how to do that. Maybe not. But in any case, these other players play some kind of role. And maybe, South Korea has a reliable election cycle, so maybe that also plays into your regression analysis. Japan is, some other negotiations about kidnapped Japanese. I'm wondering just how you factor those in your regression analysis. That's one. The second question is more of a current news cycle question. And in addition to the development with Russia, what's interesting about North Korea recently is that it's becoming exceedingly hostile to South Korea. But sending some some friendly messages to Japan, especially Prime Minister Kishida, perhaps to drive a wedge between Japan and South Korea. I'm wondering how you view, what your views might be on this development.
Yeah. So that's thanks for the question. It's an interesting one. Yes, I mean the North Korea has really sort of gone on an all-out frontal assault on South Korea rhetorically, right? Again, discrediting unification as a goal, calling South Korea the enemy state, these sorts of things. This is significant action. It's not unprecedented. Some of you may remember when North Korea blew up the Inter-Korean reunification center, right? That was built by the South Koreans. They physically blew the thing up, right? So there's decoupling that's taking place all the time, right? I'm not saying we should discount it, but it's not unprecedented. We've seen it before, and I think largely it's a reaction to the current government in South Korea, a conservative government in South Korea. But then, like I said before, I think that is actually that to me is actually a signal that they are not going to war, because if they were seriously considering such an action, in addition to a lot of things that would be happening on the ground that we would be able to see, maybe not through open satellite image, but certainly through classified satellite imagery, there'd be a lot of things in addition to not seeing that. At the same time, they would be, through deception, talking about engaging with South Korea, right? Not decoupling from South Korea. In terms of the addressee of the provocations, I think we do assume that most of these are with regard to the United States. There was a period in time in which the dominant thesis with regard to North Korean provocations were that we called them provocations because they were actually trying to provoke diplomacy. They were trying to get the United States to come to the table by rattling the cages. But as I said in my presentation, there may be some of that involved here, but a lot of it has to do with science and development, and a lot of it has to do now with operational exercising. The Japan piece to me is also very interesting. There are people here who know a lot more about Japan than I do, but there are a couple of things that are interesting. The first is that even from the late Prime Minister Abe, in his efforts to reconcile with a number of countries in the region, he did, towards the end of his prime ministership, talk about unconditional diplomacy with North Korea. Kishida has taken that up in the sense that they've been very clear that abductions is not a precondition now for diplomacy, open to diplomacy unconditionally. The North Koreans did send condolences to Japan for the earthquake, and then there were supposed to be some soccer matches that were supposed to take place that Pyongyang would host that involved Japan. Where that goes, I'm not really sure, but I do think it is. To me, what was most unusual was the condolences that were sent over the earthquake. I mean, North Korea has not done that before, I do think your hunch is right that part of it is a tactic to try to sort of break up this increasingly coherent trilateral U.S.-Japan-Korea relationship. I think they probably feel that they have less of a chance with the Yoon government in South Korea, and probably not with the Biden administration, but they feel that they can maybe peel Japan off through this effort. From a diplomacy perspective, I mean, I'm like a nobody. What I say doesn't matter. But from a U.S. perspective, I don't think it's a bad thing if there is some sort of dialogue that's taking place, even through the famous secret channel between Japan and DPRK. If there's some sort of dialogue that's taking place, I don't think that's a bad thing. It could give us some sort of contact. The Japanese would consult closely with the U.S. government. There'd be some opportunity for contact, but right now there's none, right? And that's not a good situation. No.
Thank you so much. It was a very interesting talk. I am wondering if you have any information about the relationship between North Korea and Iran, because British ambassador some years ago told me that Iran has the biggest embassy in Pyongyang. And if there are some technical cooperation, which of them helping the other one? How does it work? And then the second question is that the way that North Korea throwing back the letter in this respect, is it that they are like toward democratic governments generally? Because I study Iran and they don't respect democratic governments in US at all, and they execute twice the opposition during the Democrat. I am wondering, is it the same structure that they don't have respect at all for democratic governments?
Well, on the second question, North Korea is like other closed political systems in the sense that they say their government represents the people's choice, right? So they say that, right, that in that sense, and they do vote in the Supreme People's Assembly, and of course everybody votes in favor. Nobody votes against or abstains, but they do sort of say that they have, in that sense, they are a republic, right? So I mean, it's Democratic People's Republic of Korea, right? So in that sense, but of course they don't. No, North Korea, in terms of their rhetoric, has been very critical of U.S. democracies. They focus on things like racism, anti-Asian violence, right? All the problems that we have are when the U.S. government actually and the COVAX tried to engage with North Korea during the pandemic about vaccines, the North Koreans would sort of ridicule countries like the United States, and they would say like, why can't you get your people to get all vaccinated? Like, we don't understand that. If we instituted a vaccine program, it'd be done in like 3 days, right? 22 million people, we'd be done in 3 days. So they are very critical in that sense. In terms of North Korea and Iran, yeah, there's a lot of activity there. It probably goes in both directions. I mean, North Korea's sort of mainstay missile force, the Shahab, I think the Shahab missile, these are all North Korean missiles, right? They're all North Korean missiles purchased from North Korea. There's a lot of sharing of scientists. It's believed to be that there's testing that takes place, like they will do testing by proxy. Like if, for example, if there's a rocket test engine in Iran, we'd be looking to see whether that rocket test engine is for Iran or for North Korea, right? So there's a lot of cooperation and activity between the two sides.
So we're going to have a seminar on North Korean threat of nuclear proliferation in May. So we talk about maybe cooperation between North Korea and Iran and also like Hamas, I mean like the tolerance and those stuff. So in May, so we're going to have one scholar and one former officer of U.S. intelligence. So it's in May. So check our website here. And then
Sugia Park, I'm a research staff at CSAC. Thank you for the informative and very comprehensive presentations. I want to piggyback right on the very last comment that you made at the end of your talk. What specific steps should the U.S. government take with the Moscow and perhaps with Beijing to curtail the high-tech transfer between Moscow and DPRK? And in addition to 2024, do you have any hypothesis on where DPRK would be in about 5 to 10 years?
Okay, on the first question on sort of specific policy recommendations, this is what's great about not being in government anymore. Because as an academic, you can say, this is a real problem. And here are all the reasons it's difficult, and then you can kind of stop your presentation there. Right? But like in government, you have to think, right? You have to think about like what's the next step. So there really aren't a lot of easy solutions here. Trying to incentivize North Korea, well, so all right, let's start at the top. Intercepting these shipments, right? I didn't bring the map because we haven't. The images that I showed you are from a report that we have coming out later this week, but the map is not complete yet, so I couldn't show you the map. But if you look at the route these are taking from Najin to Dane, then across by land to Tikoresk and Mozdov and these other places, from a proliferation security initiative standpoint, it's very hard to intercept, like very hard to sort of stop these shipments. So that's one option, but difficult, very difficult to do. The other, of course, is sanctioning, right? There's lots of sanctions. We can do secondary sanctioning, these sorts of things, but I'm not confident that will change the picture either. I mean, both Russia and North Korea are under heavy sanctioning right now. It's not really changing their behavior. So sanctions aren't really the answer. Politically, I think it's very difficult politically to get the Biden administration in an election year to say, let's try incentives like lifting sanctions. Let's try incentives like lifting UN Security Council sanctions to try to incentivize North Korea. Very difficult politically in an election year, and I don't know if it'll work, right? Because who knows what North Korea, we don't know what North Korea is getting from Russia, but they're clearly getting a lot because if Kim Jong-un goes to Russia, he's not going there just for food and fuel, right? So he's clearly getting a lot of stuff there. So those are sort of the traditional policy tools we would look to. Then you have to look to other things like, is there a possible portfolio, humanitarian assistance, global health package that you could put together to try to get the North Koreans at least to come to the table? Right? they still are one of the only two countries in the world that remain unvaccinated, right? As far as we know, they don't have any antivirals like Paxlovid, those sorts of things, right? So you have to imagine that they would be interested in that. Although, during the pandemic, they didn't. The Biden administration did try this, and they didn't show any interest, right? And then the fourth option is China, right? To see what's possible with China. So on the one hand, I think China cannot be comfortable with the way the Korean Peninsula is being pulled into the war in Ukraine, right? China historically has always wanted stability on its border with the Korean Peninsula. That has been number one priority, stability, right? But the Korean Peninsula is being pulled into the war in Ukraine, right? Russia, 2.5 million rounds of ammunition. And the South Koreans are now, I think, the largest supplier of munitions to Ukraine. They're supplying, it's through backfilling, right? But Korea and Japan are providing more munitions to Ukraine than all NATO countries combined, right? So China cannot be happy with the way the Korean Peninsula is being pulled into the war in Ukraine. And so that might be one incentive to try to work with them. On the other hand, as I said earlier, China guards its influence on the peninsula jealously, right? When I was in government, we always used to say to the Chinese, you need to do more. You have all the influence on North Korea. The Chinese always said, oh, we don't have a lot of influence. So you think we do, but we really don't. But they jealously guard that influence, right? And so they cannot be happy with the way the Russians are getting closer and closer to the North Koreans. And so that actually incentivizes them not to slap the North Koreans on the wrist, but to try to engage them. So China's facing countervailing forces on this, and it's not clear which direction that they're gonna go. It requires the United States to engage more directly with China on this. I think those conversations are happening post APEC, right here in San Francisco, where you had the big sort of Xi Jinping Biden meeting, and things look like at least guardrails have been put on the relationship now. Maybe this is something that they can talk about, but that's another possibility. But there aren't really a lot of good options, right? There are not really a lot of good options here. 5 to 10 years down the road, I don't. It's hard to say, but I think I know where North Korea wants to end up, right? They want to end up being a nuclear weapon state with a nuclear arsenal the size of Britain or France. I think that's where they want to end up. So.
That was great. Tom Finger from APARC. You didn't mention the economy in talking about the reasons you don't expect North Korea to go to war. And I wonder if you could. What is your understanding of the current state of the economy and how much latitude or not it allows for political space for Kim Jong-un?
Yeah. So, it's so a couple of things. The first is we don't really have at all a clear handle on the North Korean economy. There are numbers that economists can cite, but they survived a pandemic lockdown for 3 years, right? No trade with China, zero. They were even enforcing internally a crackdown on smuggling routes because they were so deathly afraid of COVID coming into the country. So. And this was the country that, famously is reported to constitute 95% of North Korea's external trade is China. So they basically cut that off for 3 years, and the economy survived, somehow survived. So their cyber they still have a cyber capability, and that definitely, cyber theft definitely increased during the pandemic. It definitely increased during the pandemic. Initially, we thought that they would, after the Sony hack, we thought they would use cyber as a weapon of terrorism. The Biden administration classified it as cyber crime, what was done against Sony. And there were a lot of people in the community that disagreed with that. They thought it should be classified as terrorism. But in the end, they were right because North Korea didn't use it. They didn't go after reservoirs electric grids and everything, as you said, they went after like cryptocurrency, right? They went after ATMs in Iran, right? Pakistan, right? Southeast Asia. They just tried to acquire hard currency with it. A good percentage of that has not gone back into the economy. It's gone into financing the weapons program. Again, the Biden administration, I give them credit for this. I mean, Tom will understand this well as former head of intelligence, but the Biden administration has been, downgrading a lot of information now so that it can be released publicly. And so one of the things that was announced is that, a significant percentage of their cryptocurrency theft is not being plowed back into the economy. It's going to the weapons of mass destruction program. So the economy, it somehow survived the pandemic for 3 years. I don't think anybody expected that to happen. And of course, going forward now, again, based on numbers that we can't really trust, it can only go up, right? Because it was basically completely impoverished over the last 3 years. And then with the stuff from Russia, China's increasing their trade now. China and Russia are no longer complying with any UN sanctions resolutions at all on North Korea. The trade numbers and the economic numbers are only going to go up. I think in the third or the fourth quarter of last year, China trade with North Korea was like at historic highs. Right? So if anything, the economy, the numbers will at least show an uptick because you're starting from such a low point. And China and Russia are no longer complying with sanctions at all, as far as we know. And so that obviously is going to help buttress the economy.
So let's take both questions and then
I'm a Jay Choi from editor in the Beijing Labs. I just want to know that what if the Trump elected this year? What will change in around the Korean Peninsula? Like how much possibility to meet Kim Jong-un again, and how much possibility to withdraw all U.S. military from Korea, and how much possibility to get an alliance between U.S. and North Korea and Japan. So it's really hard to tell, but I just want to know your opinion.
First of all, thank you for your logical presentations. My name is Shohei Samejima. Actually, I'll be JSDF Officer Cadet next month. After that, next year, I'll be stationed in some basic regiments. My question is actually, there are two questions. First question is, Japan's are actually looking for the view for the Taiwan incident. So this, as you can see, as you said in the 2024 of the North Korean the situations, how did they affect the Taiwan's of the Taiwan security consultants? And also, second question is, as you said, like CCP and DPRK, they did not have connections for a while. Of course, they restarted, I believe, and very recent. And if the CCP is looking after the Taiwan, and what is there, if there's chain reactions in the Korean Peninsula or security threats? That is. Thank you.
Thank you for the questions. On Donald Trump and the Korean Peninsula, so nobody knows, right? Total guessing. Again, based on past behavior, we would expect to see that Trump would continue to ask for much more money for host nation support. So there's something called SMA, which is the Special Measures Agreement. That is a cost-sharing formula that the South Korean government pays for the stationing of U.S. forces on the Korean Peninsula. During his first term, Trump wanted to increase that from $1 billion to $5 billion. So I'm sure that's something that he would try to push forward with. Again, we have another data set that looks at all the statements that Donald Trump has made about U.S. forces overseas, including in Korea. And it has been a long-standing belief by Donald Trump that there should be no U.S. ground troops in Korea. It goes actually all the way back to an interview he did as a businessman in Playboy magazine in like 1989 or something like that, where he first mentioned it. And his views don't change, right? It's largely based in sort of the 1980s and 90s, where allies like Japan and Korea were seen as trade adversaries, right? And he still sort of thinks that way. So he sees the troop presence in Korea as basically free riding by countries like South Korea and Japan, and they will push, and he will push either to remove troops or increase the cost sharing formula. The cost sharing formula to me is not as big an issue for Korea because there is an agreement in place that will last until if Trump were to win, the current cost sharing agreement would last until the last year of Trump's presidency. It's more of a concern from Japan. So I actually hear more from the Japanese. Japanese are more worried about this, right? And on troop withdrawal, the U.S. Congress was aware of what Trump wanted to do, so there was actually something that was built into the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, that required the White House to get approval from the Senate for any sort of change in troop presence on the Korean Peninsula. But that was in the last NDAA, which is now expired. And I think the new one was reauthorized, but I don't know if that's in there. If it's in there, that's a good thing. If it's not, and Trump wins, it could be very different. And then the third point, which again it's made a lot of news because it was a story that came out in Politico by someone who was supposedly an unnamed Trump advisor, where he said that if Trump wins, he's basically going to lift sanctions against North Korea in return for the end to nuclear tests and long-range ballistic missile tests, right? And responsible non-proliferation behavior. So basically, lift sanctions, and that would be the price to be paid for no more ICBM tests, no more nuclear tests, and no proliferation, horizontal proliferation, right? So basically accepting North Korea as a nuclear weapon state. Trump denied it, right? He denied it. He said, that's stupid. I would never do that. But he's done stupid things before. And then in terms of his personal relationship with Kim, I do think he would want to continue it. I mean, I think he really feels, he constantly shows off these letters that he's gotten. So I think he'd want to continue that sort of relationship. But what will be interesting is that, as I said, if 2024, we're going to see a lot of behavior from North Korea. So North Korea will again become the front burner issue for a new re-elected Biden administration or for a re-elected Trump administration. And so the first time Trump dealt with that, he dealt with it in a very confrontational way that, in my opinion, nearly took the peninsula to war. Right? Nearly took the peninsula to war. There may be others who disagree with that, but as some of you know, I saw that really up close and personal, and I thought we were headed for a war. Right? But I don't think Trump would do that this time. I think he would try to engage the North Korean leader because he has this relationship. On the second point on Taiwan, you're sort of national security expert. So in the national security expert community, right, there is a lot more talk and concern now about so-called opportunistic aggression, right? That if something were to happen in one theater, that might then provide the opportunity for something to happen in another theater. If you talk to the Taiwan defense specialists, they worry about China egging North Korea on to do something on the Korean Peninsula that will then distract the United States and open an opportunity for China. If you talk to Korea national security experts, they worry about China doing something in Taiwan and then egging on the North Koreans to do something on the Korean Peninsula. So, as national security experts, you're supposed to sort of worst case everything. I think the last thing that China wants in 2024 is any sort of conflict in the Taiwan Strait. I think that's the absolute last thing that they want. They've got huge economic problems at home. Xi Jinping, you all read the story about water and the missiles, right? Xi Jinping has no confidence in his military right now. He thinks it's just a vehicle for corruption, and he's going to fix it, right? So in the interim, that's good news. In the long term, it's not good news because he's going to try to build a real capable military. But in the interim, I think they want foreign direct investment. China wants foreign direct investment. One of the reasons, the main reason Xi Jinping came to San Francisco was not to meet with Biden. It was to meet with the American CEOs, right? Because U.S. net investment is now flowing out of China, not flowing into China. So for all these reasons, I don't think that sort of conflict will happen. And as I said, I don't think we're going to war on the Korean Peninsula. But as national security experts, you have to worst case everything. So
let me ask one final question before we end. Okay, so going back to title of your talk, what to expect from North Korea in 2024. I mean, this year important because it's an election year for United States. And then, as you know, as you said, okay, North Korea is watching quite closely the election. So I agree with you that I don't think North Korea will go to war. But let's assume that sometime in the summer, they'll take some military action that may involve killing of, let's say, South Korean or even possibly American soldiers. So in a major conflict, it's not war. Now, how would Biden administration respond to that? Because now the war is going on in Europe and Middle East. Taiwan also we are watching very closely. So what are you going to do? I mean, it's not war, but still in a major conflict that may involve killing of some soldiers.
Yeah. I mean, this would be, I think that would be the first on the peace to war spectrum. This would be sort of the outermost bounds that North Korea would go in 2024, right? Some sort of coercive military action, seizing an island, shelling an island, something in the DMZ, something along those lines. I think you're right. I mean, I think the last thing the United States needs or wants now is another conflict, right? That's the last thing they want with Gaza, with the Ukraine, with the focus on Taiwan, South China Sea, East China Sea. Like that's the last thing that they want. So my guess is that, I mean, we don't know, depending on what happens, the U.S. reaction will be, militarily will be restrained. Diplomatically, it will be to try to bring other countries either through the G7 or other organizations along for sanctions. But I think the wild card is, as maybe implied by your question, the wild card is South Korea. Because the Yoon government has made very clear that they have an offensive military doctrine. I don't know if any of you listened to our podcast, The Impossible State, but we had Yoon's first national security advisor, Kim Sung-han, on. And I don't know if he said this during the podcast or maybe it was off camera, but I said, what is South Korea, the Yoon government's response to a North Korean provocation, Yongpyeong Island, Cheonan sinking, like that? And he said it would be proportionate. And I said, how do you define proportionate? And he said, we would respond exponentially. And I said, that's what you mean by proportionate, exponentially? He said, yeah. And the other important thing is that those sorts of things that you're describing, right, Yongpyeong Island, Cheonan, from the South Korean government perspective, that is not considered a wartime contingency. That is considered a peacetime contingency. And of course, South Korea exercises command in peacetime, right? So they would, I think that would be the wild card, is how the United States would probably caution and advise for restraint, but not clear that would be the case. So part of it is communicating this to the North Koreans through China or through Russia or through communicating to the North Koreans that South Koreans are not going to sit still if the North Koreans do something.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.